lots of ideas and thoughts that probably come to mind when we hear the word New Earth. And anyone who is part of ISD knows and speaks this language. So it's exciting when we get to talk with each other who've been doing this work for so long, kind of as hermits, that now we get to do it together and have these conversations together. So I'm going to talk a little bit and kind of unfold that. I'm seeing the image of a flower, like the one behind Barb, that beautiful lotus, unfolding that crown and awakening the new earth within us, really through our heart, through our lotus heart. So just to give you a little bit about me to start, I went to college in Long Island. I went to Hofstra University, actually. And I was really excited because it's that time in your life where you can kind of choose what you want. And it was the first time that I was exposed to metaphysics, even though we all have that within us growing up, especially if we're here at ISD, we've all kind of had that within us. So when I was in college and I took my first metaphysics course, we really looked at comparative religion of metaphysics and Buddhism and Hinduism and Sufism and Christianity and some of the Meister Eckhart teachings of mysticism with Christianity, which are really amazing. And in that moment, I thought to myself, I really would love to be a metaphysical minister. But there was really no route at that time that was available to me in that present moment. So instead, I shifted my sails and I went to school to become a school counselor. So the really exciting part about that is that I started to then understand and merge metaphysics and psychology, which really gets to the heart of the ancient art of alchemy. So we're going to talk about alchemy and how it connects to the new earth. So what is the new earth? What does that mean? And you all have your own resonance with what that means. But I'm going to share this a little from my experience on what it's meant to me that I know others here have experienced as well. So for me, the new earth is this hidden dimension that's been available all along in all of the multi-dimensions, all of the dimensions of reality. It's this hidden dimension that's been veiled to us that is very blissful, a consciousness of bliss and love and interconnection with all beings. And I truly, wholeheartedly believe that is where our collective consciousness of humanity is going as we continue to heal the survivalist consciousness from one of the darkest ages of a human race. So what does it mean, the new earth, when we say the new earth and we talk about this higher dimensional consciousness, right? Some people refer to it as more that higher fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional consciousness. What I've been shown is it's about healing inverted consciousness. So if we look at Christ consciousness and we look at inverted consciousness, the difference here would be that if we are walking in Christ consciousness, we are walking in love. We are in love and we are making love to everything that we come across, even those things that may distortedly be perceived as wrong or evil. However, if we are in a divine plane, then there's nothing wrong. And it's our consciousness that's constantly judging right and wrong and good and bad. And a lot of you here probably already know this with the ideas of transcending duality to be able to hold this more love consciousness, transcending black and white, good and evil, good and bad, to the present moment of just holding love in every present now moment. So this new earth paradigm, the Egyptians use this word NeferKa. And what that meant, and again, these are all words that we're using to try to explain an idea or a concept or consciousness. So it's a little bit tricky, but I'm going to try to kind of give my experience with it. It's this flow. It's like the flow, like the namaste, right? The flow in me sees the flow in you. And this natural, gentle flow with nature. So if you're walking in the woods and you're just watching a river flow, or you're watching the bees cross-pollinate, or you're watching the birds singing back and forth to each other, right? We feel that flow, we feel that bliss. But it's when we get caught up in the human drama and all those other pieces and the interactions or the outward influence into our minds of other ideas that take us away from this flow. The whole concept that this higher dimension of reality we can ascend into it without having to fall out of it. But it is a process. So it's using our imagination for good, dream weaving with our imagination, instead of using our imagination for fear, for despair, for struggle, and seeing every moment as divine. I'll give you an example. This morning, so I have two kiddos, right? And my son, he takes one of those really big exercise balls we have that he bounces on, and he takes it, and he wasn't thinking, he's never done this before. So it wasn't, out of a bad, he wasn't thinking he was going to do any harm, but he took it and he bounced it off the floor, and it went on the kitchen counter, and it took a glass down, and it shattered all over the floor. Now, anybody in that moment, depending on our trauma or depending on our responses or our triggers, could have handled that situation in any different way, right? So if we're looking at that from more of this higher dimensional consciousness, we see all moments as divine. So even though I had to, not have as much time to get ready to come here and talk to you all, I can shift my thought processes to what I may have said, frustration and anger and all that, to all moments are divine. Okay. So all moments are divine. Everything is good. So it's kind of shifting into lessening our triggers, for example, even if there's broken glass. So just to keep moving on, this higher dimensional consciousness of being in flow is very connected to the Buddha teachings and meditation and presence. And we all know that we feel that flow so much more easily when we're kind of coming out of that beta brainwave state and we're going more into that alpha theta dreaming state. And we're not so caught up in the monkey mind. So the reason, a lot of us constantly are doing meditation, and you all know this, is that it helps to bring us out of those lower states of consciousness. And it's exciting to see where the human race is going, but we're not going to see that on the news, are we, too much? So then what happens when we come down from meditation, we come out of meditation, and often somebody who's done a very long spiritual practice knows that when you come out of meditation, you never come down and you never come out, because the new reality is your meditation and it is your flow, and it becomes this higher dimensional heart resonance frequency with the outer reality, where it's this beautiful dance happening. So a lot of the work that a lot of the pieces that tend to happen with this is that we somehow need to save ourselves, that we're bad or wrong because we can't do this yet, or we haven't mastered this yet. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about a little bit as we keep going is the power of alchemizing our lower thought forms by not choosing these lower timelines of reality, the guilt, the shame, the fear, the hatred, the judgment. But we're going to get into that more in a little bit. And then how do we detoxify our minds, our bodies, and the earth with our loving thought forms? So choosing love in our thoughts instead of fear or the lower consciousness thought forms that I just mentioned before, the fear, the shame, the guilt, the regret. How do we choose that in our daily lives and begin to that process of alchemy, or continue that process of alchemy, without being so hard on ourselves for feeling like we need to save ourselves or the planet? And one of the greatest ways to do that, I have found, is by just loving. So it's not necessarily about saving ourselves or saving a planet. It's about love. Love in our thought forms and love for each other. So I'm going to say a quote here real quick, and then I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. And this is a quote by Ramana Maharshi. And he said, "The greatest obstacle to enlightenment is getting past the delusion that you are not already enlightened." And that's the power of the present moment, because we can get stuck in our traumas and self-improvement sometimes. But when we're in the present moment, I am, right? The words that follow, I am enlightened. I am love. I am at one with all. I am peace, fulfilling that within our daily minds each day. And I know it is not always easy. It does take some work. So I wanted to talk about, for anybody that read my bio that Barb had sent out prior to this, I've been trained extensively in the ancient Egyptian ascension lineage. And I've been blessed because I not only received formal training, but I receive training every day. It comes to me spiritually and metaphysically through this process. And one of the ideas I wanted to talk about is the scales of Ma'at. And if anybody's familiar with the scales of Ma'at, this is from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but it talks about that my interpretation from my experience is that we cannot ascend into these higher dimensions, into this new earth resonance, until your heart is as light as a feather. Okay. So basically what that means is that our heart can begin to resonate and energetically feel the connection with this higher flow state, this journey to enlightenment, when we've let go of our need to be addicted to karma, for example. And what I've been shown is it's not so much about karma, it is the guilt we hold. It is the lower thought form we hold where we keep punishing ourselves for a mistake. So it's the lower thought form, the fear, the guilt. So once we've been able to forgive ourselves and forgive others and release these and lighten the heart, let go of the baggage that we're holding through loving of ourselves, then our scales start to balance and become as light as a feather. And then we're given these beautiful mystical moments, these beautiful high level, and many of you have had these moments of interconnection that you could never describe, that happen more and more the lighter our heart gets. And the reason that there is this net, this veil between those dimensions, is because you manifest very quickly in these higher dimensions. What you think about becomes your reality. So you have to have this love resonance, or, if we thought very quickly and we were afraid what would happen outside of us very quickly, it could be very scary. So that's why we always hear the only way through is love. And that's true. And that's one of Yeshua's teachings as well, that the kingdom is within, right? The kingdom is within us. It's within us. It's our light heart. It's our shifting of our inverted consciousness to a Christ consciousness light heart. So how do we experience this dimension that I keep saying has always been there, but has been veiled to us for so long? How do we awaken to it? So one of the classes that I teach, it's a series that I do, and I find a lot of women come to my classes, but I'm starting to have men come as well. And I think this is really important. And the first concept that I talk about is self-love. Okay. So self-love is a tricky one, and we're hearing it a lot now, right? It's becoming a trendy word, but there's a lot to self-love. One of the first questions I ask those who come to my class is, who modeled for you self-love in your life? So just think about this for a minute. Who modeled for you self-love, and who gave it to you consistently 100% of the time? And often I get crickets in this moment. And a lot of times I'll hear, well, my mom, but it wasn't consistent. And I, as a mom, have those moments too. So and let me be very clear, this is not anybody's fault. It's a collective consciousness that we need to look at to shift a belief. So what happened is a lot of the responses I hear about that, especially from the older generations, is they'll say, well, we were taught not to be boastful. We were taught not to stand out. We were taught to be good boy or girl. And, that children should be seen and not heard, kind of thing, where as a school counselor, I can tell you what ends up happening is that the things that we say to our kids, or to little ones, or even to each other as adults, to our inner child, the things that are said to us become our inner voice. So it's so important to kind of really look at what our inner voice is. Is it judgy? Is it, do we constantly criticize ourselves? And what I will tell you is most people, I find, do more than they realize that they do. So now that we've figured out, okay, who taught us self-love, I can tell you in the education system, what happened was we were so focused on character education, which is teaching kids how to love others, that we never really delved into a curriculum that was teaching people how to love themselves. So what do we have now? We have this collective of a lot of inner critic networks, and not only in the outer with each other, because that is the imprint that was formed from within us. So a lot of this healing comes down to looking at your inner network, your operating system, to see where you maybe were not, where you were told you weren't enough, or where you weren't loved unconditionally, to shift that so you can start doing that for yourself. And that's where we start to shift those lower thought forms of guilt and shame. Those are big ones. And they're such wasted emotions because they just self-harm. It's disease. We cause disease when we get stuck in that inner critic, and that eating ourselves versus feeding ourselves. And why is this so important to divinity? And how is this connected to divinity? Because for so long, when we saw divinity as outside of us, we didn't see ourselves as divine. So when we begin to see ourselves as divine, as a spark, as a fractal, you talk about sacred geometry, as a fractal of the all is imagination, the all is mind, the all is the creation. When we see ourselves as a fractal of that, a spark of that, we are that, just like a child is to a parent, we are that. We then can embrace ourselves, to love ourselves for seeing ourselves and our divinity. And for so long, we've seen ourselves as either not good enough, or not divine enough, or sinful, or not worthy. And it's time to shift that as a collective and as within ourselves, to say, I am divine. I'm a child of the universe. I was here to create and to love and to experience. So we have these inner imprints from our society that we should eat ourselves up. We should judge ourselves. We should judge each other. And that's those parts that really need to get cleaned up so that our hearts can be light as a feather. And the next concept I'm going to talk about quickly here is called self-talk. So I talked about in the beginning how I was very blessed to have the psychology and the spirituality. So self-talk is a concept where we can start looking at this talk that we do to ourselves all the time, right? And I often give this example of spilled milk, just like the broken glass on the floor. If you take a jug of milk and you pour it into a cup and it spills all over the floor, what do you say to yourself in that moment? Do you say, oh, I'm such an idiot? Or do you gleefully just keep going about your day and cleaning it up, right? So there's so many moments that we can look at our self-talk to see how we interact and relate to ourselves. And whether we openly do it in the outer with others, often the way we relate to ourselves is that imprint for how we relate to others. We may do it in our minds thinking they can't hear us if we're mad at somebody, but it is. And when we clean up that thought form towards self, it's easier to clean it up toward other too, if that makes sense. Very powerful mirror that occurs with consciousness. Okay, so we didn't have a lot of these examples in our lives, right? Of the divine interaction of loving self and loving other unconditionally, radically accepting, despite our differences, right? We are all fractals of God. We are all one. We are all connected, but we all have our daily personalities. We all have our unique personalities, which makes this not boring and it makes it more fun. So we didn't have a lot of those examples. And one of the other ministers at ISD and I were in a car ride one day. She's passed now, a dear loved one to many of us, named Sue. And we were talking about how women didn't really have a lot of those ascended master examples like we have of Yeshua or Krishna or Buddha. So we were talking about how that was kind of an obstacle as well for women, because we could connect to the divine masculine, but it was very tricky to connect to a divine feminine. And we had Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, Green Tara from Buddhism, who's also in Hinduism, and Kuan Yin as an example. So there are these archetypes that hold this divine feminine and divine masculine essence of unconditional love and for self and other that are starting now to be coming out more and more, that are not just masculine. So, and there's reasons for that, because we know the feminine was the divine feminine was really suppressed for a long time in a lot of different ways. So once we begin to embrace and embody and feel our divinity and our love for ourselves, which is our divine birthright, we start to open up to this outer reality, this shift that occurs. And some of you may have experienced it here at Madison if you've done meditation groups together, right? Sometimes we form this group mind that happens, or these synchronicities that occur. And those are beautiful signposts as well. Another signpost of mine is like the ringing in your ears. Like if you've had, you're feeling like you're in a very high spiritual plane, either with others or on your own, you can hear that kind of ring, that higher frequency that's coming in, that higher sound vibration. And the room just feels different. It just feels more enlightened and more alive. Things are more colorful. You begin to see your inner healed divine masculine and divine feminine energies in others outside of you more and more and more. The lighter our heart is, and the less we judge. Judgment is one of the biggest pieces to us not having a light heart, which is so interesting because a lot of people will look at the scales of Ma'at and see that as the judgment scene, but really it's a self-judgment scene. And I think that's the piece that was missing for so long, that it wasn't an outer authoritarian or judgmental God that was judging us. It was the imprint of the authoritarian judgmental pieces where we were judging ourselves, which stripped us of our divinity. So when we remove the self-judgment, we lighten the heart. We give ourselves the benefit of the doubt for our humanness, for our love, for our beautiful divinity that we often forget about because we're just walking about our world, sometimes in the rat race, or just, going grocery shopping and forgetting that we are walking divinity. When I look in your eyes, I'm looking in divine eyes, it's a total shift in perception. And I don't hold that all the time. I haven't completely mastered that myself, but it's a different way of looking at our reality. And it's sometimes tricky because we see all this outer chaos, right? But one of the things that's really important is that the outer chaos doesn't shift until we shift it within us, right? I think it was Gandhi that said, we will change the world when we change ourselves. I'm paraphrasing there, but it's true. And it's this powerful mirror that occurs. And the more of us that do that, the more we will see those shifts occur in the outer. And that's where we're going. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about really quick, one of these great techniques I found was from Lujan Matisse. He's a shaman and an author. And he talked about thoughts like strings that are above your head. And when we become the observer and we start to look at them instead of just following all of the pathways that society gave us and that our families gave us, good and bad, right? When we start to look at it, especially a lower thought form, those ones I talked about, the fear, shame, guilt, when we start to see it come in like a thought string, we can then stop and decide, wait, am I going to pull that one or not? And if we pull it and it's a lower thought form, it kind of takes us down that Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole, right? It can take us into fear all day if we choose it. But we can stop ourselves. This is where alchemy takes place. We can stop ourselves by seeing it and saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. A lot of my clients use that. They have lots of different words they use. One of them calls it stinky thinking. One of them says, we don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore. So you're taking your power back, the power of love, this more Christ consciousness emanation. And you're saying, you're taking control. You're taking control of the thought forms so that they no longer control you. And it's somebody else's program. It wasn't yours. So then you get to create it yourself and you get to rework it and you get to lighten your heart by choosing love thoughts and not pulling down on those old strings that we've pulled on for so long, as individuals and as a collective for thousands and thousands of years. So I'm going to end this with that quote I said in the beginning. The greatest obstacle to enlightenment is getting past the delusion that you are not already enlightened. And just a few points to consider as I close this up. All moments can be divine. What if our purpose is joy? What if our purpose is joy? And love is always the answer. The power, the word, the creation, and our divine birthright. Barb, thank you so much for inviting me. And it was so great to spend this time with you guys this morning. Thank you.